Welcome to another episode of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. A progressive and populist insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining show on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people, and not just the elite few. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters from his mid-Michigan attic, it's time for the award-winning Pat Johnston. It's all yours, Pat.
Yeah, welcome to another edition of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I am Pat Johnston, and ladies, if there's anything I hope that you have learned from this new release of the Epstein Files, I really do hope it's this lesson that dear leader Trump said to CNN's Caitlin Collins this week when Collins was asking about the numerous victims who were raped, trafficked, or sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and their billionaire and political oligarchy cabal.
But what would you say to people who feel like they haven't gotten justice, Mr. President?
Something that people care about. Yeah, what did you say? Go ahead.
What would you say to the survivors who feel like they haven't gotten justice?
You are the worst reporter. No wonder CNN has no ratings because of people like you. You know, she's a young woman. I don't think I've ever seen you smile. I've known you for 10 years. I don't think I've ever seen a smile on your face.
I'm asking you about survivors of Jeffrey Epstein,
You know why
Mr.
you're not smiling? Because you know you're not telling the truth. And you're a very dishonest organization, and they should be ashamed of you.
I mean, you see right there, ladies, just smile. Just smile and look pretty. I mean, that's what dear leader Trump is telling Caitlin Collins, that all women who are looking for justice, no. Shut up. Just look pretty and smile. Yet, here I am defending Caitlin Collins, and meanwhile, you noticed that not one of her White House correspondents' colleagues jumped in to her defense. Why? Because access means more to corporate media elites than standing up for principles, standing up for the rule of law, standing up for your colleagues, and standing up for reality. And that's why corporate media numbers have dropped, especially after dear leader's election win about 15 months ago. But misogyny is the MAGA Republican way. It's never changed, and it's what gets MAGA off. That's MAGA's takeaway from their dear leader allowing the MAGA Republican Party to be known as the pedophile protector party. Isn't it unsurprising that for all of their talk about wanting to protect children and worrying about young girls, that was all for show? No, it was not surprising. Completely unsurprising. And sure, maybe a court of law hasn't found dear leader Trump guilty of any wrongdoing when it comes to Epstein, or better yet, all we've got in this new batch of Epstein Files are allegations of wrongdoing by dear leader. Allegations, of course, does not mean guilty. However, as I said in my Monday musing, dear leader Trump has already been found guilty in a court of law of being a sex abuser. We have him on tape saying grabbing women by their privates is something that he can get away with. So funny. We know in an interview in the early 2000s that Trump said Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaire financier who had ties to many of the billionaire bros that we've been covering on the show for quite some time, likes his girls on the young side. And dear leader kind of joked around about that. Now, dear leader declares himself to being the smartest guy in the room who only picks the best, the brightest, and the most worthwhile people and friends to hang around with, and who moves 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But for some reason, despite his close relationship with Epstein during the 90s through the mid-2000s, dear leader just didn't know anything about Epstein's pedophilia ring for the billionaire and political cabal. I mean, we're really supposed to believe that? We are really supposed to believe that? And in that same White House gaggle Q&A there that you heard with Caitlin Collins, dear leader Trump declared that the latest batch of Epstein Files absolves him, and how this was nothing but a hit job against him by the late Epstein, who supposedly committed suicide, and by others. Really? Is that really how it's going down? Because his name appears in these Epstein Files more than 38,000 times. Now, I don't know. If I was somebody in Congress, I would say somebody whose name appears 38,000 times in these Epstein files, hey, maybe that person should come in and answer some questions. That's just me. And in those files, by the way, there's an FBI document containing one source who accuses Trump of forcing one of Epstein's victims, presumed to be 13 or 14 years old, to perform oral sex on him approximately 35 years ago in New Jersey. That's according to the New Republic. Ugh, it's disgusting. The Trump regime's Department of Justice then announced, all right, after they released these, 3 million pages, they announced that it would only release half of the documents, which is breaking a law passed by Congress, near the end of last year, to release all of the files. Hey, they're acting lawlessly. What were the chances? Oh, the DOJ had to recapture many documents since the ones released contained pictures of the victims. Because when in doubt, the regime is always about making the victims pay. Now back to that same interview where Dear Leader told CNN's Caitlin Collins that she'd be much better if she just smiled. Trump said, it's probably time to move on from this. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, his name is in these files again over 38,000 times, and he says it's time to move on. Of course it is. You see, this whole saga shows not only how interconnected the billionaire oligarchy is with the political elite establishment, but it also shows how we're being run by a bunch of loser pedophile men who know they are above the law. Dear Leader ran as the law and order candidate, remember? While he not only became a convicted sexual abuser, but he also worked hard to protect all of those in his elite, untouchable crowd from getting nailed in the story. Thankfully, that did not happen, as we see how Elon Musk begged Epstein to attend his parties. The regime's Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick lied when he said he broke ties from Epstein. Israel's former Prime Minister Ehud Barak kept close ties with Epstein. And then there's Steve Bannon, who served in the regime's first term and who remains a powerful MAGA influencer with his podcast. Now, Bannon kept contact with Epstein, including interviewing him for a documentary in 2019 that PBS says was meant to rebuild Epstein's reputation. And in that same PBS story, we have this. One 2018 exchange, for example, focused on Trump's threats at the time to oust Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. In a 2019 message, Bannon asked Jeffrey Epstein if he could supply his plane to pick him up in Rome. Well, they just seem so buddy-buddy, don't they? So there was Bannon in 2019 talking with Epstein just months before his arrest and then subsequent death to discuss ousting Fed Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, and then ask him, if he could pick him up in Rome. Now, let's just go back real quickly, okay, because we have to remember this. Jeffrey Epstein pled guilty to the solicitation of minors, and then he also had to register as a sex offender back in 2007. And yet, despite all that, Steve Bannon and many of these other people, many of these other billionaire oligarchs, many of these other political elites, they continued talking with him. One hand washes the other, all to further help this global billionaire and political elite cabal filled with pedophiles whose ringleader is one that Steve Bannon planned to rehabilitate. Sickening. Which leads me to this one email found in the files, though. And according to The Independent, it shows the convicted pedophile emailing tech bro billionaire Palantir CEO Peter Thiel over the wonderful news of the Brexit vote last decade. Now, Brexit is when Great Britain voted to leave the European Union, and that vote pleased the hell out of Epstein, who told Peter Thiel in an email that Brexit is just the beginning. And in that same email chain or thread, Epstein wrote the following: return to tribalism, counter to globalization, amazing new alliances. You and I both agreed zero interest rates were too high. Zero interest rates were too high. And as I said in your office, finding things on their way to collapse was much easier than finding the next bargain. That one email, everyone, that one email right there gives perfect insight to exactly what the game is all about for the billionaire oligarch class. Blow up economies, pay off political leaders to levy shock doctrine prescribed austerity measures to decimate the working class while allowing the billionaires to gobble up all of the rest. You wonder why corporations are remaining silent as fascism is taking over the country? Well, there you have it. The corporate authoritarians are on the march, and they don't mind if white nationalists help them gain more wealth and more political power. I mean, if you're wondering why the Trump regime fought to have those files released, well, there you go. That was another reason. Well, actually, two reasons: to protect pedophiles, but also so that way nobody got any insight into this billionaire oligarch class. I mean, the regime and MAGA Republicans would rather go into this year's elections known as the Pedophile Protector Party than to sell out their own billionaire base. I mean, they're banking on the prediction that in the end, the American people don't care at all about protecting children. Remember when they tried to sell you on how trans Americans were more dangerous than anyone else? Now you understand why they played that card. Now, getting back to Steve Bannon, he made other news this week by ignoring the Epstein Files, and instead he said this on his podcast.
You're damn right. We're going to have ICE surround the polls come November. We're not going to sit here and allow you to steal the country again. And you can whine and cry and throw your toys out of the pram all you want, but we will never again allow an election to be stolen.
We're going to have ICE surrounding the polls in November. I mean, that would be one of the ways to fulfill Dear Leader's promise to have Republicans take over or nationalize our elections. I mean, you do recall when MAGA Republicans and Tea Party Republicans were all about states' rights, correct? Well, I guess that went by the wayside, along with free speech, protecting children, caring about the working class, and, Second Amendment rights. So the regime are flat out telling you that they're sending in the ICE Gestapo to harass, to beat up, to disappear, and if need be, kill anyone they feel like on Election Day. This is being done in part to intimidate certain voters who happen to be of brown or black skin, and, to even intimidate white people from visiting polls, fearing they could be caught in the crossfire. And if they dare step in to try to protect marginalized voters, they better watch out. And that's because the regime and MAGA Republicans understand two things. One, they're on the losing side when it comes to the ICE Gestapo. And that's because the regime and MAGA Republicans understand fully that they are on the losing side when it comes to the ICE Gestapo. People are showing up and marching across the state of Michigan and across the country to counter what ICE is doing. Blue areas, red areas, working class Americans are fighting back against fascism. It's a beautiful thing. And it's pushed Democrats in Washington to at least read the tea leaves, I suppose, and push back somewhat. After a handful of Democrats initially voted to give ICE additional funding as part of that spending bill a couple of weeks ago, Senate Democrats said that they would vote for the bill minus spending for Homeland Security until they get some measures installed to put a little pressure on ICE. And so far, it's worked. I mean, I'm not celebrating too much because that means we've got 2 extra weeks of really nothing happening while ICE continues to terrorize American streets and neighborhoods. However, I am happy with this amendment that Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders introduced that claws back $75 billion in ICE money and then redirects it to restore Medicaid cuts from the MAGA murder budget last year. And every Democrat and 2 Republicans in the Senate voted for that amendment. Would that have happened 3-4 months ago without the people out there in the streets? I don't think so. Also, as the New Republic's Greg Sargent notes, a recent Pew Research poll shows that when asked if they support ICE detaining immigrants in concentration camps while their cases are still being decided, 64% of the country said no, they oppose. 64%. And Pew Research also shows that 60% oppose freezing visas and 66% oppose canceling out asylum. Those are pretty solid majorities. Greg Sargent's story also describes how towns across the country, including areas that supported Trump, are fighting against having detention centers, or better yet known as concentration camps in their towns. Here in our state of Michigan, Bridge, Michigan's Laura Gibbons, Jordan Hermany, and Justin Hinckley reports the following, and I quote, "Some migrants detained in Michigan last year were charged with serious crimes, including 6 people for murder, 26 people for sexual assault, and 59 people for assault. But most of those more than 3,000 detainees had no criminal record when they were booked, according to data." So again, 6 people were charged with serious crimes out of the 3,000. And look, I'm fine with deporting those found guilty of serious crimes like murder. I think just about everybody is. Now, again, I like to repeat these other numbers. 59 people out of the 3,000 were charged with assault, and 26 of those 3,000 were charged with sexual assault. Whoa, 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 wait. Sexual assault, does that mean we have to deport Dear Leader too? That means, everyone, this was never about deporting criminals. This was about driving out people of color to make America whiter again. Working class Michiganders, true patriots, are onto all of this, which is why there were numerous protests against ICE across the state last week, including a good turnout by the indivisible Central Michigan group in Mount Pleasant last Saturday. I mean, I wasn't seeing those kinds of things happening a decade ago up in Mount Pleasant. We're seeing it now. That's why people are protesting Willow Run Airport being used as a primary source to move immigrants who were kidnapped by ICE in Michigan to concentration camps in Louisiana. And that's why people are protesting concentration camps from being utilized here in Michigan, like the Lake Correctional Facility up in Baldwin. Now, working class Michiganders, like working class Americans, are doing this on their own without really any Democratic Party assistance. And while Michigan's Democratic senators, Gary Peters and Alyssa Slotkin, are now voting to withhold future ICE funding in these spending bills for now, let's not forget they each voted to confirm Kristi Noem to be the head of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE. And they're also not calling for ICE to be abolished. I thought we were exceptional in this country. I thought we wanted to invite those who wanted to be part of this American experience. I guess only if they're white. MAGA Michigan Republicans are all about the Trump regime's fascism to drive out as many brown or black people as they can, and to do it by using the ICE Gestapo. That's terrorism. And that's why calling for reforms to the ICE Gestapo, it just ain't enough. It's not. That's why milquetoast centrism or corporatism not only is a loser cause, but it's what brought us up to this point to begin with. And because of the Democratic Party's failure to acknowledge reality rather than appealing to these same corporate elites who hung out or wanted to be part of the Jeffrey Epstein worldwide pedophilia ring, the working class is taking to the streets to make change happen on our terms. Now, I caught this clip published by the Kalamazoo Gazette, and I shared it with everyone on the Left of Lansing Facebook page, but I'd like to share it with you here this week on the show. And according to the Kalamazoo Gazette, it says that around 370 people attended a public forum organized by the Do Something Committee of the Kalamazoo County Democratic Party. And this forum's purpose was to address the ICE Gestapo's increased activities in communities, the rights of citizens in those communities, including, of course, Kalamazoo during these times, and how the local government can respond to ICE while in their community. And Vice Mayor of the city of Kalamazoo, Drew Duncan, addressed this forum. And if you'd like to know where the majority of the country is right now when it comes to the regime's ICE Gestapo, I think Drew Duncan gives a very clear picture. Listen.
This is not about being for or against immigration. This is about whether government power has limits. And whether those limits still matter when the people affected have the least political power. When any agency ignores warrants, bypasses due process, or intimidates communities, that is not enforcement. That is erosion. And if ICE rears its head in this community, the expectation is that we hold the line. Like Minnesota, we hold the line. Like Minnesota, we do not let them kidnap our neighbors. Most importantly, it's important that our neighbors, all of them, whether they look like us, sound like us, etc., know that we have an unyielding love for this community. And that's not just the streets or the buildings or the restaurants. It is the people that make up the lifeblood of the city of Kalamazoo in this county. And loving means showing it out loud. And I can tell you, as I started this panel, I am fluent in the language of appreciation. And I appreciate this community. And I'll be damned if I let anyone come kidnap anyone in my community. Thank you.
Man, listen to that applause. I'm going to wrap up this segment by talking about progressive writer and friend of this show, Hamilton Nolan, who recently interviewed author Christopher Mathias on his book titled How to Catch a Fascist, which you can check out for yourself on Hamilton Nolan's Substack called How Things Work. And I wanted to read part of this answer from Christopher Mathias when Hamilton asked him if America is fascist today. Mathias said, "It certainly is, although there is always a little fascism sprinkled throughout our government over time, as marginalized people know." But it's this part of his answer which really, really hit home with me. And Mathias said, and I quote here, "I think what's been frustrating these last few years is this insistence among the pundit and chattering classes that the scariest words in our language, fascism, genocide, concentration camps, should almost never be used, lest we diminish them, that they only apply to these very specific historical periods. But I think the reason we have these words is to use them. The lesson of the Holocaust is not never again because it could possibly happen again. It's never again as in we have to be effing vigilant that this never happens again to anyone ever. That's why it's important to call what's happening in Gaza a genocide. It's why it's important to call ICE detention centers concentration camps. It's why it's important to call Trump and MAGA fascist. These are all 5-alarm fires, the biggest moral emergencies. They deserve our scariest words so we can stop them. I mean, where is Christopher Mathias wrong in that answer? I can't find one part where he's wrong. If you ever wonder why I'm advocating or pushing for or demanding for bolder and more progressive change, this right here, this is what I'm talking about. Going to the American voters and celebrating the fact that on the federal level, you're fighting to get ICE body cameras while still refusing to demand the Gestapo's abolishment only serves to place a cotton ball on a gaping wound. Supporting so-called moderates or corporate centrists isn't going to make this march towards fascism stop anytime soon. The Overton window has been pushed so far to the right that the only real goal a centrist corporate Democrat will achieve is slightly slowing down this march. We've been spending far too much time, I think, fighting to protect, to always protect. I always hear this. We have to protect all these gains made by the working class. Then only to watch those gains and those victories get chipped away and chipped away and chipped away to the point that all it took was a Donald Trump to go in and wipe all those gains out completely and swiftly. We kept fighting for years to protect Social Security, to protect Medicare, to protect Medicaid, to protect food stamps, to protect child care, to protect abortion rights, to protect DEI, to protect women in the workplace, to protect the LGBTQ plus community, to protect union rights, to protect environmental rights, and yes, to protect democracy. We were always fighting to protect something. But look at what fighting to just hold a line did to this country as corporate authoritarians joined forces with white Christian nationalists, or just straight up white nationalists, as Julia Pulver suggested last week. Did holding a line and remaining moderate while kowtowing to corporate interest, the billionaire oligarch class, did all of that end up winning the day? Did it? Did it really? Do you feel like it won the day? Having strong and smart progressive candidates like Abdul al-Sayed in Michigan's Democratic Senate race or Democratic Socialist Yousef Rabi in Ann Arbor is not only necessary, but it's imperative to have strong progressive voices like that. Why? Because they're pushing to change the narrative, to shove that Overton window back towards the center just a little bit. They're not fighting to protect something that's already been disappeared, if not entirely gone. They're actually pushing an agenda to change this march towards fascism rather than appeasing it or finding ways to tepidly slow it down. That's not radical. The radicalism we're seeing is by MAGA republicanism and by corporate authoritarians. It's not by those trying to fight for the working class and to fight for democracy. We feel powerless at times because corporate Democrats refuse or are afraid to say they will change the system. They're afraid because they also benefit from this corporate authoritarian system. The only way to defeat this kind of system, a system that rewards the ICE Gestapo, that rewards billionaires and political elites to essentially get away with being part of a worldwide pedophilia ring, and a system that rewards those who dismantle the working class. The only way to defeat that kind of system is to change that system. And we can start changing that system in some of the primaries across the state. That's one way. I mean, it still amazes me how millions of working class Americans are hitting the streets to oppose the Trump regime and fascism, thanks to some good old-fashioned organizing amongst the people. I mean, this is a decentralized effort, while Democratic Party leaders, are hemming and hawing over whether or not to say abolish ICE. I mean, the fight is happening, and it really is like the Democratic Party leadership is not on the same planet, and in some ways, they're not. Look, we can change the old way and for once push for real positive change for the working class, for the marginalized millions, and for democracy while putting MAGA, also known as the Pedophile Protection Party, on the defense. We can actually put them on the defense for a change. It's not that hard to do. You're listening to LOL.
You're listening to Michigan's premier progressive podcast. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. Have you ever heard Pat's lectures on why desserts with fruit aren't really desserts? Or why the 70s produced the greatest movies of all time? I have. So be happy you're just hearing him rant about politics. If you'd like to contact Pat about politics or debate how cocoa is technically a fruit, send a message to leftoflansing@gmail.com. Here's Pat Johnston.
Hey, I also wanted to let you know that you can find everything on the Left of Lansing Patreon page. That's right. All you have to do is type in Left of Lansing. You'll find me there. And I'll be providing some things on Patreon that you won't be able to see or hear anywhere else. But you will still find a complete archive of all of the show episodes and some of the videos that I post there as well. All right. I was talking about how we progressives can't shy away from telling truth, and we have to use strong language in these frightful times to let the American people, let the working class understand that we hear them loud and clear. And then I read a story on how former Michigan governors Rick Flint Water Crisis Snyder, Jennifer Granholm, Jim Blanchard, and John Engler held a joint call for what they called a day of civility. Cool. Now, back here in the real world, we have people marching in the streets, and some who are willing to put their lives on the line to protect the country from the Trump regime's fascistic goals. We don't have time for this day of civility. Yeah, sure, that means centrism, that means corporatism, I hear you. And I wanted to say something before I talk about Michigan's Democratic primary Senate race. I agree with what Jeff Smith from GRID, or Grand Rapids Institute for Information Democracy, wrote this week when he said that elections are not enough to change the present trajectory that we're on here in the country. The organizing that we're seeing from so many independent, people-driven groups is what will force real changes. And we're seeing that happen in real time. I do believe that voting is important because if we can put the right kinds of people in office who are willing to be strong, progressive voices for the working class and for democracy, well, then I think that's better than nothing. But that will happen by building progressive movements that political parties just cannot ignore. Again, we are seeing that happen across the state and the country, and that's why this election in Michigan is important. Here's one reason. We've got progressive ballot proposals that'll place a 5% tax on the billionaire class in the state to help put more money back into our public school system. Money that they stole through the years. Such a bill would never, ever pass in Lansing, but the people are making it happen. So make sure to collect signatures or to sign the Invest in My Kids ballot proposal. And then there's another proposal called Mop Up Michigan, which would help end corporate influence in the state by banning corporations from making political contributions to any politician if they are doing business here in the state. We know that DTE Energy, for instance, bribes a lot of our politicians in Lansing, so this would never even pass the state legislature either. So that's two ways to bypass a corrupt corporate power structure in Lansing to help even out the playing field here for the working class. But another reason why this election is important is that I still do believe that some change to the system can happen by electing those promising to end such a corrupt system that rewards criminality and backroom deals, that punishes those of us not in the untouchable class. And that's why I believe that elections do matter, but it takes a movement and it takes a candidate who hears that movement to make elections happen. That's how you make people believe in the electoral process, kind of like what we're seeing with Zohran Mamdani in New York City. That's why I believe a Tea Party of our own must happen in Michigan, because picking those who will push to continue this current system won't help us push back and defeat fascism. So that brings me to Michigan's Democratic Senate primary race, because I feel like this primary is one where the people will get a say, and it will have ramifications in Michigan, the nation, and the world. It really will. In the last Senate primary race a couple of years ago, you'll recall Michigan's Democratic Party essentially handpicked then Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin to be the heir apparent to fill longtime Senator Debbie Stabenow's seat. And no one really wanted to challenge Slotkin and the Democratic Party machine. And we were told to trust the Democratic Party in going with Slotkin, who prided herself as a so-called moderate who could dress down any MAGA Republican due to her service within the CIA. So everyone was told to stand down, and stand down they did. And then, on election night, Slotkin severely underperformed and received less of the total vote than Kamala Harris did in Michigan. Now, Slotkin held a 3.5% lead in the final Detroit News WDIV Channel 4 News survey heading into that election, and then Slotkin ended up winning by just 0.3 percentage points over one of the most weak and most flawed Republican candidates of all time, Florida Mike Rogers. And yet, Alyssa Slotkin is the person the National Democratic Party decided to push to be the face of what they view as the future of the party that just lost to Donald Trump for the second time. I mean, Slotkin really didn't run on anything, and it showed because she barely won as Rogers nearly rode Dear Leader's coattails to victory. And due to his close defeat, Florida Mike Rogers is back for yet another run in the Senate, even though he left Michigan to make millions in Florida as a government lobbyist. He can be easily destroyed, he can be easily dismantled, he can be easily decimated if Michigan Democrats put up the right candidate to face him. But there's more to it, actually. This Senate race, the Senate primary race, will also help point the way where the Democratic Party should go. The race, of course, is between Oakland County State Senator Mallory McMorrow, Oakland County Congresswoman Haley Stevens, and former Detroit Health Department Executive Director and progressive Dr. Abdul El-Sayed. Now, the latest poll that we saw from Emerson College shows McMorrow in the lead with 22%, followed by the establishment pick, Haley Stevens, at 17%, and then El-Sayed at 16%. So it is close, but here was the most relevant number from that poll, everyone. Listen up. 38% of voters are still undecided. 38%. That's a huge and significant number. So it's anybody's race, and we still have 6 months to go. Now, I haven't exactly announced my pick for the race, although I think you have surmised by now that I do not want and will fight hard against Congresswoman Haley Stevens from being the Democratic Party's nominee, and here's why. Stevens is endorsed by former Michigan State House Speaker Joe Tate. Yes, that Joe Tate who did whatever it took to put corporate interest above helping the working class, especially during the lame duck period when Democrats still had the trifecta. Polluter pay was put on the back burner as well as other working class bills. But what wasn't put on the back burner, everyone, oh yes, was a bill designed to grant massive tax breaks and corporate welfare to billionaire tech bro data centers. And even more, Tate's former chief of staff was picked by Governor Gretchen Whitmer to replace an environmental advocate on the Michigan Public Service Commission. That commission then helped provide the vote needed to greenlight that large data center in Saline Township that's being financed by Oracle, owned by the billionaire Ellison family, who's also tearing apart CBS News. How wonderful, right? Not only that, but Haley Stevens voted last year on a resolution thanking ICE for its service to America. Thanking the ICE Gestapo for its service? What? And she's slightly, changing her tune now on the ICE Gestapo, but she's not demanding any abolishment of it. Haley Stevens, of course, is bought and paid for by the American Israeli lobbying group known as AIPAC. And she's yet to call the right-wing Israeli government's attacks on Gaza to be a genocide. She doesn't want to do anything to stop corporate influence in our elections. And Stevens would just continue to spend money for Israel. As for Mallory McMorrow, she was one of my first guests to ever appear on the show when she was a first-term state senator. She was kind, quick, displayed a sense of what was wrong in this country, and the state especially, and sounded like she really wanted to change things back in 2019. She also gave that great speech attacking MAGA Republicans in Michigan for sending out mailers calling McMorrow a groomer who wanted to sexualize children. Speaking of which, I really still have not heard many MAGA Michigan Republican House members or those in the Senate call for Dear Leader's resignation since the release of the Epstein Files. And that speech that McMorrow gave in 2022 was a nice shot in the arm, and it showed Democrats how to fight back against MAGA, at least on that front. The state senator also showed some reluctance to okay corporate welfare, but then when that data center bill came up for a vote last year, she gave it a thumbs up. But in her defense, most Democrats in the state Senate voted for it, except for one, and that was state senator and good friend of this show, Stephanie Chang. Mallory McMorrow also refused to say that we need to abolish ICE and is instead using this Democratic Party consultant wishy-washy talk, this speech about having to change it from within. And, well, that really means nothing right now. And she's calling for a public option to be available for healthcare, which is exactly what Alyssa Slotkin called for last year, but all that does is keeps the same crappy healthcare system in place. Now, she did eventually acknowledge that Israel's actions in Gaza are a genocide. It took her a while to make such a pronouncement, but I suppose better late than never, which is, better than Haley Stevens' stance. I'll give her that. And then there's Abdul El-Sayed. He's calling for ICE to be abolished, saying, quote, retraining ICE won't fix it. And the only reason to deny this is political cowardness. Rather than protecting us, it has become the thing from which we need to be protected. Abolishing this agency is the only safe path forward. That's the way to go. And he has always called Israel's actions against the Palestinian people to be a genocide and that we need to stop funding Israel's right-wing government. He's never received money from AIPAC either. And he's received the support of progressive state representative and good friend of this show, Kerry Reingans, as well as former Congressman Andy Levin, who lost to Haley Stevens in a primary battle after their districts were combined into one a few years ago. And if you recall, AIPAC backed Stevens over Levin because Levin, who is Jewish, didn't believe that we should just be handing taxpayer money at will to Israel's right-wing genocidal government. And when Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said over the weekend that one of his main jobs is to give all of the aid and money that Israel needs, Abdul El-Sayed said on Twitter, no, delivering all the aid that Israel needs while Americans struggle for healthcare, housing, and basic dignity should not be part of the job description for U.S. Senate Minority Leader. Exactly. Haley Stevens, by the way, to get back to her, once said that Chuck Schumer is doing a fantastic job. El-Sayed is not for giving tech bro data centers carte blanche in our state, and he's supporting the ballot proposals to stop utilities like DTE from giving campaign bribes to our politicians. But here's the other thing. He's also talking about affordability while going after corporate corruption and corporate greed. He's attacking the system that needs to change. And as you just heard me talk about earlier, we need to move the Overton window. Okay, Abdul El-Sayed is doing just that because centrism or wishy-washy Democratic corporate speak just won't cut it this time around. That's why he's always been an advocate for Medicare for all, something we desperately need in this country. We have to make sure that no matter what, there is a baseline kind of coverage that every American can receive no matter what. And in a one-on-one matchup against Mike Rogers, it won't even be a contest. So I think it's a no-brainer to back a strong, common-sense progressive like Abdul El-Sayed because he knows how to talk to working-class Michiganders by showing how he will make their lives better, not taking weak, centrist positions or wishy-washy positions, but by attacking the very system that has been hurting the working class. If Democrats are going to show that they're really for the working class in the state, then this Democratic primary race could be the way to show it. You're listening to LOL.
Bringing progressivism with passion each and every week. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. Follow us on Blue Sky, Twitter, Facebook, and the Gram. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts, and subscribe to us on YouTube. We'd also like to thank Audio Boom for publishing the show and helping us spread our populist, progressive, and patriotic message. Speaking of which, let's get back to the show with Pat.
Remember, you can always email me, leftoflansing@gmail.com, if you'd like to continue, a topic or conversation that I brought up here on the show, or maybe something I talked about with a guest. Please email me, leftoflansing@gmail.com. I always love hearing from you. And check out the show on the YouTube, as I'm posting video shorts there. I recorded about an 80-second video on the Epstein Files earlier this week, and how sickening that the presumed MAGA Republican nominee for Michigan's open U.S. Senate seat, Florida, Mike Rogers, continues to put his arm around dear leader, who not only fought against any of the Epstein files to be released, but who also ensured to give Epstein's wife and convicted pedophile sex trafficker co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell a very nice spot in a comfy so-called prison for rich people. And Florida Mike Rogers says he wants to be dear leader Trump's vote for Michigan in the Senate. Sickening. By the way, did you see that Ford worker, JT Sabula? You remember him? He called dear leader a pedophile protector to his face last month. And then Ford subsequently suspended him because, corporations don't ever want to make the pedophile protector angry. Well, he apparently had his suspension lifted. And I really don't think that Ford had a choice, considering working class Americans donated around $800,000 to JT Sabula in GoFundMe donations. I just love it. I just love it when the working class stands up together to oppose the sick and corrupt corporate culture, a culture that we can only change. Time now for the Left of Lansing last call. Speaking of corporate culture, the Bowl That Is Super is coming up here this weekend. And look, I'm sorry, but I still find it strange that we have the Winter Olympics happening at the same time as the final football game of the year. I don't know. It just doesn't seem right, but I digress. Now, I'm not going to break down the nuances of the game, or who I think is going to win, or who I think is going to win the coin toss, or how long the national anthem will be, or which commercial from whatever company has caught my eye. You can find that at numerous other places, but I do quickly want to focus on the halftime show featuring Grammy Award-winning Puerto Rican artist Bad Bunny. Now, while admittedly I am a little older and I'm not completely familiar with Bad Bunny's complete song catalog, whenever I've seen him perform, I get the appeal. I completely get the appeal. And the NFL corporation is doing what it can to expand demographically, and so it's a no-brainer to have Bad Bunny perform its halftime show, considering he was Spotify's highest-rated artist in 2025. Now, I just have to remind everyone, Puerto Rico is part of the United States, and if you're born a Puerto Rican, you're automatically a U.S. citizen. And I'm saying that because some in the weird MAGA universe don't really seem to grasp that fact. Which is why MAGA's Turning Point USA, the late racist Charlie Kirk's little piece of work there, is hosting what they are calling an alternative halftime show, where its main themes will be whiter is better. Oh, wait, no, that's not it. Okay, well, seems like it to me, but I guess what they're going to say is that their theme is faith, family, and freedom. And that show will feature artists like Brantley Gilbert, Lee Brice, and Gabby Barrett, and of course, Bob Ritchie, also known here in Michigan as Kid Rock. Now, Bob said his show will be an American show and not one with Spanish lyrics. Well, I guess now I know never to play Los Lobos for Bob. I really do hope that Bob will play the family classic, a heartwarming family classic called Cool Daddy Cool, where he says, young ladies, I like them underage. Some say that's statutory, and then his late sidekick named Josie would add in, but I say it's mandatory. Cool. I can't think of a better, more wholesome depiction of the MAGA cult as it rushes to protect its dear leader as the Epstein Files come out. So I think that would be a perfect song, a song that embodies faith, family, and freedom. Bob, you never put Detroit City back on the map, and You ain't a cowboy. You're just a pedophile pusher and protector and a washed-up has-been. And rather than burning out Bob, you should have just simply faded away.
You're listening to Left of Lansing. Music for the show and everything else on Left of Lansing is provided by Wanderbeats. To hear the latest project and complete music archives, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site or subscribe to Space Leopard on YouTube. Now, back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Left of Lansing. Remember, you can visit Left of Lansing on Patreon and find some content there that you can't get anywhere else. And before I let you go, I just have to inform you that it appears Democratic Party leaders in Congress, Hakeem Jeffries in the House and Chuck Schumer in the Senate, are backing off a little bit on their so-called stringent moves to hold ICE accountable. They're signaling now that they might not go for complete bans on masks that these Gestapo agents wear. I mean, that was supposed to be their line in the sand, and well, it's being erased. Are you shocked? Like I've said today, movements can make change. Don't wait for corporate politicians to save the day because they won't do it. Until next time, remember, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan.
You've been listening to Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. Left of Lansing was produced by Pat Johnston, brainstormed by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and yes, hosted by Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. Thanks to our good friend Rich for website assistance, and thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. We thank Audio Boom for publishing the podcast every week. Visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to Michigan's premier progressive podcast, and we'll talk with you again next week.